welcome and thank you so much for being here today. We all have a lot of things to do and appreciate your attendance here. I'm going to be talking about the Common Core from a broader perspective. There are lots of issues about the content of the core, and we could talk about that, and it is being talked about at length in a variety of settings, but I'm going to talk about it a little bit more broadly, thinking specifically about the origins and prospects of the Common Core. And the reason for that is because the courses I teach at New Paltz tend to focus on curriculum and assessment. So I'm deeply involved with the idea of what curriculum is and how it is assessed, which is, of course, affected tremendously by the new Common Core standards. Curriculum is not something that is just handed down from the curriculum gods and plopped into schools in particular disciplines. It is a set of decisions made by people who have particular values. So the Common Core is no different from any other curriculum in that respect. No curriculum is value neutral. So although what I'm going to be talking about today is not directly related to the content of the Common Core, this idea undergirds everything I'm going to be saying about it. The key questions that teachers need to think about and administrators need to think about as they implement the Common Core are these. Where did they come from and where are they going? And that, as you can see, connects to the idea of the origins and prospects of the Common Core. The Common Core itself is simply a tool. Like any other tool, experts who use it need to think about it. I would hope that a surgeon would not just accept a set of tools that was handed to him by a particular group of people and use them without first looking at them and thinking about whether they are going to help what she is doing or hurt what she is doing, make it easier or make it harder, and think about the reasons why the tools are being presented. So educators, to analyze the Common Core, need to ask questions like these. Who made this tool and why? Who paid for its design, its construction, and its distribution? And how was it made? Because how things that we use are made matter, and how they are implemented matters as well. This whole idea of the Common Core, or what I'm going to be talking about with respect to it today, deals with the conflicts, the underlying conflicts between private corporations and public entities such as schools. They have completely different purposes. Public education is designed to serve society, to advance the common good, and private corporations have one reason for existing, one purpose for what they do, and that is to make money. This is not a bad thing. This is in no way meant to cast aspersions on the corporations who do this work. That is what they are intended to do. But when you put these two groups, these two ideologies together, conflicts emerge. And sometimes those conflicts are obvious, and sometimes they're not so easy to see. So when I think about the Common Core, the way, just kind of an image summing up what I've begun with, the Common Core is just a tool. Apple, obviously we're all using that. We need to think about, though, where it came from and where it's going. You get a clue about what I might think about from those images, perhaps. So where did the Common Core come from? Well, Rupert Murdoch in 2010 said, when it comes to K through 12 education, we, meaning corporate leaders, we see a $500 billion sector in the U.S. He's entitled to his opinion, and he's not wrong. But it isn't the way that I, as an educator, would perceive the public education system in the U.S. It's a completely different perspective. The Common Core standards were part of a business plan that relates to Rupert Murdoch's statement. They had nothing to do with creating a more effective educational system. Rupert Murdoch doesn't have that as a goal, nor should he. I guess he should, but he's not trying to do it. So when we think about why the Common Core exists and who they serve, they should serve students, primarily teachers who are working to help students, and the communities as well. However, in reality, the Common Core serves the needs of business. And that overshadows even the most positive intentions. So where did they come from? Who supports the Common Core? The education industrial complex, which is mainly made up of these groups, the philanthropic funds, philanthropists, for-profit multinational publishers, tech startups, conservative think tanks, and nonprofit advocacy groups. These are the ones who are supporting the development, who supported the development of the Common Core, and who are supporting its implementation. What are the assumptions in the core? Well, we quoted Rupert Murdoch, now we're going to quote Bill Gates. In 2009, before Rupert Murdoch made his kind of notorious quote, Bill Gates explained the purpose for the development of the Common Core very clearly. He said when the tests are aligned to the common standards meaning the Common Core standards that he was funding the development of, the curriculum will line up as well. And that will unleash powerful market forces in the service of better teaching. For the first time, there will be a large base of customers eager to buy products that will help every kid learn and every teacher get better. So the assumptions in the Common Core are that all human problems are essentially technical in nature and can be solved through technical means. We'll just find the one right way and we'll scale it up. Scaling up, right, it's a business term. All these are business terms, marketing terms. It means developing practices that can be broken into modules that can then be implemented widely. Engage New York encompasses those modules, that idea. And a lot of the technologies that are supporting the Common Core are aligned with this exact idea as well. Another myth about the Common Core is that they were state-led. The Common Core state standards is embedded in the name. However, they were not state-led. New York State has standards. Those were developed here in the state. Those were state-led. These are not. They are national standards. There are lots of reasons why it's not politically helpful for those who want to implement the Common Core to call them national standards, because many people object to that term. But they are not. They were not state-led. These four organizations received a total of $147.9 million from Bill Gates, $32.8 million of which was expressly earmarked to advance the Common Core standards. I don't use the word state in there anymore. Moreover, the Race to the Top legislation provides the structure to allow the Common Core to be easily implemented. In fact, in order to qualify for Race to the Top funds, states had to agree to adopt the Common Core. There was no choice in that. The U.S. Department of Education has awarded over $300 million to support the two independent test development consortia as well. So the corporations and the government are in alignment with the idea that the Common Core should be implemented in schools. So in short, it materialized as a tool of the political elite, Rupert Murdoch, Bill Gates, etc., and the private corporate sector who see public education as a big pot of money that they can use to make profits. It was neither sought nor developed by educators or those who care about students or their common good. It was intended for political gain and economic profit, and that matters because, as I said earlier, the origins of a movement need to be examined before implementation. We need to think about where they came from. Despite elevated rhetoric about the Common Core, its underlying assumptions about what counts as knowledge, what counts as literacy, what kinds of culture matter, will exacerbate inequality. There's no question about it. Standardized assessments measure privilege, and standardized assessments connected to the Common Core will exacerbate inequality, make it worse. Furthermore, let's imagine that the Common Core standards developed by corporate entities and supported by philanthropic funds are wonderful, because it's certainly possible for corporations to develop great things. I love my iPhone. I love my iPad. Corporations can make wonderful things. Suppose they're great. If they're so good, why are they not being adopted by the independent elite schools where the people who are pushing the Common Core send their children? Bill Gates' children, Barack Obama's children, John King's children, Arne Duncan's children, none of their children go to schools that have implemented the Common Core or the related standards. In fact, Meryl Tisch, who is the chancellor of the SUNY system, the State University of New York system, not only does she not send her own children to schools that will implement the Common Core, she pays for the children of her, what she calls help, her household help, to go to private schools that are not implementing the Common Core. So Common Core, good enough for the common people, good enough for other people's children. So the origins and prospects, to get back to my initial thought, make a difference. And as a simple example, I love to write, but if I don't want to use a pen or purchase a pen that was made, for example, by imprisoned children or slaves anywhere, So the origins of the pen that I use make a difference. Furthermore, my pen, despite having a sharp point, I won't use my pen to hurt someone. So like my pen, the Common Core is a tool. However, it's important to think about where it came from, and where it's going, who developed it, and why. The goals of the corporate reformers are simple. They see the tax funds that support public schools as a stable set of funds. Our tax money support public school, and they will continue to come. So it's a good investment. However, what makes it challenging is that public education system is primarily human capital. People work in systems. Most of the money that goes in public education goes to salaries of people who work there. We can't sell off our airplanes to make a lot of money, to make it profitable. So the only way to make education more profitable for corporations is to lower the pay of teachers and administrators, is to somehow scale up education so that it's more technical and less professional. And my last slide is an image created by Morna McDermott that shows the linkages among these many political and corporate organizations and their implementation of the Common Core. And I think it is disturbing. And thank you for your time.
Okay, Julie, thank you very much. Dr. Garrison?
Good evening, folks. How are you doing? Great. Thanks for coming. Could I get a sense of who's in the room? How many K-12 teachers are in the room? Okay, higher ed folks. Folks who don't fit in either category. I didn't see you raise your hand. I didn't see it. Good point. I want to get folks to think about what's going on from a much larger perspective. And I don't want you to think about it in terms of education. I want you to think about it in terms of how a society makes decisions, what are the rules that govern how those decisions are made. And I want us to think about questions of the Common Core, race to the top, as questions of who decides. In a sense, the question of who decides could be applied to any domain of life. And what I'm arguing tonight, in the 9 minutes and 32 seconds I have left, is that the issue that's really at stake with the Common Core is ultimately an issue of decision-making. In a sense, it doesn't have anything to do with education, and in a sense, it has everything to do with education. But it has to do with education in the sense that it's about the question of decision-making. And I want us to think even more carefully about the kind of authority that we're seeing. We're living through a time, as far as I understand it, where the nature of the authority that we live under is changing, and it's changing in a way that is detrimental to the kind of society I think we want to live in. It's detrimental to people being able to participate in decision-making in their communities and over the decisions that affect them. So we have a situation where governance is changing radically. So Julie just told us a little bit about the structures that are taking place. There's a big influence, right? This corporate influence over the Common Core, and that those folks are making decisions. And they're making those decisions because they want to make a lot of money. But what's actually going on is, as a result of that kind of change in how decisions are being made, the actual political apparatus and the way in which the society is governed is being radically changed that goes far and above and beyond the nature of the Common Core or race to the top. So what I want to do is I want to look at race to the top and the Common Core and these sorts of things from the point of view of how decisions are made. And what I want to do to start with that is, oh, hey, look at this. I mean, I don't really watch TV, but you guys probably do, right? So this is the Lawless Show. So my theme for today, I don't know. I can't tell. Anyway, see, it's right here. I've got a handout if you want it. So these are the Lawless guys. And actually, if you come back to my website in about 48 hours, there's going to be a cartoon based on this. But it's going to have different characters in the Lawless. And I'll let you guess as I talk who those characters are. But lawlessness is a very serious problem. And so as we talk and we hear from our practitioners later, a lot of people want to pay a lot of attention to what the practitioners are doing. But one of the things we need to think about is the conditions we live under are related to the authority at the top and the conditions that they create. So ultimately I'm arguing today that the governance structure that is realized through the Common Core and Race to the Top is one of lawlessness. So what I want to do, if I can, is I want to share with you some law. How many of you have read the law that authorizes the U.S. Department of Education to be a cabinet-level entity? Really? All right. Well, that's fantastic. One of the things that there's two bases in federal law that are applicable here. One is the General Education Provisions Act, and that's up there. You probably can't see it. What it basically says is that the federal government can't dictate curriculum or how schools are administered. Now, you can take the handout and read it for yourself. The next quote is specific to the U.S. Department of Education, which in 1979 became a cabinet-level position. I'm going to read this. I don't see well, so I'm going to look at my paper, but it's not because I don't love you. It's just because I don't see well. So I'm going to look real close. But I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm saying. This is the law. This is the spirit of the law that is to govern the activity of the U.S. Department of Education. It is the intention of Congress and the establishment of the department to protect the rights of the state and local governments and public and private educational institutions in the area of educational policies and administration of programs, and to strengthen and improve the control of such governments and institutions over their own educational programs and policies. Knowing what you know, before I say anything else, does that sound consistent with current conditions?
No.
It's very, very important. The issue isn't whether we agree with the law. The issue isn't our interpretation of the law. The issue is that the law exists, and it is the basis upon which the U.S. Department of Education is supposed to operate. Shall we read some more? Yes, we shall. I'm going to read this as well. And here is the part where it stipulates the limitations on what the U.S. Department of Education is legally allowed to do. No provision of a program administered by the Secretary or any other officer of this department shall be construed to authorize the Secretary or any such officer to execute any direction, supervision, or control over the curriculum, program of instruction, administration, or personnel of any educational institution, school, or school system, or any accrediting agency or association, or over the selection of content, of literary resources, textbooks, or other instructional materials by any educational institution or school system except as authorized by law. Without saying any more, does that seem consistent or inconsistent with current conditions? So what I want to highlight to you, as much as everyone right now wants to focus on John King, and a few of us want to focus on Merrill Tisch, the problem has to do with the actual founding law that governs the state relationship to the federal government. We might think, well, Race to the Top was authorized by the American Recovery and Restoration Act. And in this act, funds were given to Arnie Duncan as Secretary to do Race to the Top. Maybe somewhere in there, there's some waivers of these two provisions. I couldn't find any. I did look. What we find is that Race to the Top has been used as a mechanism to override state authority to craft its own laws regarding education. In New York State, we have 4 basic legal provisions that have been changed as a result of Race to the Top regarding charter schools, the CAP, teacher evaluation, one of the most fond reforms in history. Everyone loves that one. More stuff about charter schools, and of course, big data. Most of us, we could loosely interpret that and say, well, does that really fit these descriptions? I say completely they do. But there's one thing that shines through in this restriction on the role of the U.S. Department of Education, and it's with respect to curriculum. And what New York State has done, and it probably would not have done so fast, so quickly, or so aggressively, had it not been for Race to the Top, is adopt the Common Core and alter its laws to do so. This is a clear violation of 2 federal provisions. That means it's illegal. The fact that an unknown professor at DeVille College, a small liberal arts college near the border, has to point this out, and no single executive in the United States or the Congress itself has taken responsibility to hold that entity responsible for violating the law, tells us something about the state in which we live relative to the new kind of authority that's emerging. If a law is violently and repeatedly violated, and those responsible to uphold the law do not take the responsibility to enforce it, we have a serious problem that goes beyond the fact that the Common Core math is not developmentally appropriate. Let's think about this a little bit more. You can't really see it, but it makes me feel good to hit the space bar. Okay, so one of the things that we don't realize is that New York State and every other state signed an MOU. And this MOU was with respect to the National Governors Association and the Chief State School Officers, the Council of Chief State School Officers. Do you know why those two organizations, the National Governors Association and Council of Chief State School Officers, are important? Well, they didn't write it only. We don't, who the hell knows who wrote it, but they own it. And it was a provision of Race to the Top and the NCLB waiver, that's No Child Left Behind waiver, that you have to sign this memorandum agreeing to adopt the Common Core and the assessment regime that comes along with it. The federal government required states, including New York, let me just read this to you. It's really great. Purpose. The document commits states to a state-led process. Mercedes Schneider, who I linked here, and you can read her, asked the following question. I'm not going to read the rest because I don't need to. I stop right there. She says, if the process is state-led, why do the states entering into a legal arrangement require federal government to ensure? You know what that means? It means I exceeded my 10 minutes. Let me just read this. And I'll tell you, Dave will let me do this because he likes me. Because arbitrary authority is the name of the game, right? So I should be allowed to go one more minute. So what she's pointing out here is that if it's state-led, why does the state need to agree to sign up to a state-led thing if it's state-led? Why do they need a memorandum of understanding? So what's going on here? Is we have a situation where a clear provision, it's not a terribly convoluted provision, a clear provision in federal law that bars the U.S. Department of Education from compelling states to do things that they're doing, which eliminates our form of elected representatives from governing our schools, moves assessment into the private sphere such that it's outside the state's control, meaning it's outside school board control, it's outside parental control, it's outside even of our state legislators' control. That we're entering into a period of lawlessness, meaning that those who assume positions of state and federal power not only are acting illegally, but they're acting with impunity above the law, beyond the law, and outside the law, and no one is challenging them. And that, folks, is a very, very serious problem that, and if you had to watch the video, I have a Long Island teacher who lets King and Tish hear what she thinks. What she represents is the fact that it's parents, teachers in their communities who don't need to have more control taken from them. They require more control over their schools, more control over their communities. And in the sense, I'll end here and say democracy is not the problem, it's the solution.
Thank you, Mark, for that extremely broad perspective on the nature of law and policy in this country. We often forget that the Constitution says the education is the right of the and responsibility of the state, and then the state is what creates the structures, not the federal government. Okay, Florence, your turn. Would you like to be up here? Or?
Oh, I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm just going to set this timer so I don't go over, because I do like to talk. And I'm going to speak to you from a perspective of the implementation and the difficulty of the Common Core. And I do appreciate what Professor Gorlewski and Dr. Garrison had discussed prior to me, but at the building level, implementing the Common Core throughout the building and connecting it just, you know, in all of the subjects, it's trying. Is very trying. And I think that we need to look at what I try to understand is that teachers that I work with, and I believe across the country, they come to school wanting to do a good job. They care about their students. And they, with the continued mandates that are put upon them, they are experiencing some frustration. And it's very clear. And as a principal, and my colleague and good friend Greg Ladinsky is in this audience, we have the responsibility to support our teachers and to have them implement the Common Core to the best of our ability, because if we don't, their evaluation is affected. And that is unfair. That is unfair as an instructional leader, that if I do not support the frustration for the teachers and help them to implement, I set them up for failure. Now, I just want to give you a little bit of background on what I think. First of all, the standards, from a personal opinion, they were far too low. What it said is that our people, you know, the people here are not, the learners throughout the state, throughout the country, are not capable of learning anything higher. Then along comes the Common Core, whoever implemented it with, you know, the business, and I get all that, all right? And they're up here. And somewhere in between, we have some difficulties and some frustrations. What I see as being the biggest problem is that 20% of our students across this country go to school lacking the basic skills to be ready to go to school. And they are always doing the catch-up. And the frustration with the Common Core is that teachers don't have time to meet the needs, the most basic needs of some of our most struggling learners. And we just have to keep throwing things at them. And we have not a system of support for our teachers, and we don't have a system, in my opinion, of support for our most struggling learners. So when you take those 20%, and we're throwing them in, it becomes very difficult, particularly for children, teachers and children at the elementary level. But they never really seem to catch up, in my opinion, if we don't provide supports at that early thing. I think the Common Core is far too broad. I don't believe that they should be, I don't believe that the Common Core should really start until somewhere later on. It starts far too early in a child's educational thing. And my other concern is that the teacher preparation programs are not designed to help and to support. Similarly, I'm not so sure that the educational administration, you know, the admin programs are designed to support teachers and educational leaders, instructional leaders, for the implementation of the Common Core. That is probably my biggest frustration, is that it's too fast, it's too broad, and there aren't enough supports for us to be successful. I think at the end of the day, whether I agree with the Common Core or I don't agree with the Common Core, I'm gravely concerned that it's going to set up teachers for failures, schools for failures, and at the end of the day, our most vulnerable, the children. However, and I'm not going to bend on this, the standards were very low, almost to the point where it was insulting, and the Common Core, I mean, we're struggling. We have to try something. right? In my conversations with my colleague and friend Greg Levinsky, you know, the other stuff wasn't working either. So we have to try something, but these are my concerns about the Common Core. So with that, I think I'm on. Let me see, Dr. Garrison, maybe I made up some time.
Actually, you did. Thank you.
Yes, I did. Okay, great.
Thank you. Sean?
I'm trying this notes by iPad thing for the first time tonight, so if it goes blank, you'll see that I go blank. Hopefully it keeps me on track. Thanks for having me here today. Again, Lawrence talked about we're going to bring the practitioner side to this. And the thoughts by Dr. Gorlewski and Dr. Garrison, very thought-provoking, very interesting. I'm going to go back and read a little bit more on the origin of some of these ideas. But I can talk to you about what's been happening specifically in the Star Point Central School District, as well as other school districts around Erie and Niagara County over the past 3 years. In terms of the standards, I agree that the old standards, as you compare the Common Core to, the Common Core is an incredible improvement when compared to the New York State standards that we previously had. If anyone sat down and looked through the ELA standards in the old New York State documents, it was extremely difficult to decipher I have a first grader at home, what was expected of my first grader at the end of that school year. It was very difficult to decipher that. That's much clearer in the Common Core. And it not only does that in terms of on the ELA side, it will show you where your child needs to be in a particular skill area. For example, in the area of decoding words in first grade. And then it will show you where they should have been at the end of kindergarten, and right next to that, where they should be once they get to second grade. So it's very clearly laid out on the ELA side. And there's more opinion, or more evidence-based writing, instead of the old opinion. What did you do on your summer vacation? What was the most fun you had this school year? It's much more aligned, I believe, and maybe some people will say, okay, you're drinking the Kool-Aid, but it's much more aligned to what we all do in daily life in our work. We don't typically, most of us don't write opinion pieces exclusively. We don't read an incredibly large amount of fiction materials. It's a lot of nonfiction, instructional materials that we're all reading in our, especially when you get to college, but also in our careers. Think about how many times you're reading a piece of fiction. So the Common Core doesn't say throw out fiction. It says let's have a balance here. And I think that's another great thing that the Common Core has provided. Within the area of math, we're still working through aspects of math, but I do believe that the intent of to move away from being a mile wide and inch deep, the Common Core has moved away from that. So there's fewer skills at each grade level, more depth, and an equal emphasis on fluency, memorizing those math facts, and deep problem solving. Those are good things to have there. I'm not talking about teacher evaluation. Okay? I'm not talking about the tests that measure these standards. I'm talking about the standards. And from that perspective, myself and the teachers that work at Star Point and a majority of practitioners in the field feel that these are good learning targets for students. I feel comfortable sending my fourth grader, my first grader, and my preschooler to school knowing that their teacher has a set in front of them that says clearly,
The timer's done.
for me or you? Oh, okay.
Sorry, Dr. Brown.
That's all right.
You've got 6 minutes if you need it.
Good, good. So I feel confident that there is a clear set of learning targets for my 3 children when they go to school, no matter if they're going in school district A and I'm working in school district D, 30 miles away. In terms of addressing the Common Core, this didn't start in September. These were adopted in 2010, and that's when my school district and many other school districts started to have teachers working in small groups, looking at what we were currently doing, then looking at the new Common Core standards, and making changes to that curriculum. So there's no big rush for us. Has it moved fast? Yeah, over the past 3 years, it's a lot to alter and change. But we didn't start yesterday, we didn't start in September, we started in 2010, which was a long time ago. So we've had ample opportunity. When these modules, curriculum modules were produced by the state, we already had an aligned Common Core curriculum in place that we were working on in our district for the past 2 and 3 years. So in the majority of our grade levels, we looked at those modules and said, nah, we're not going to use them, we like what we have here. Okay? So this was no big shock to us. Like I said, we've been working on this for a while. In terms of a positive step, a national curriculum, I don't like that word curriculum. I like a national set of learning targets. I don't necessarily see that that's a bad thing. I think a lot of resources can be pulled together when 45 states have the same learning targets for children in grade 1. I had a Common Core parent night last night, an example of these resources that can be built now, since 45 states are on the same page. I was able to go under the National PTA website, and then the other one was the Council of Great City Schools. They had beautiful 5-page pamphlets for every grade level that were a parent guide. So we printed those out and we laid them out, and parents came and ate them up, and it gave them a little roadmap for whatever grade their child was in, so they could see, oh, this is what my child is learning this year. 5 years ago, did we have that? Not necessarily. When I was in school, who knows what was going on. But now it's clear. We can have arguments about all this other peripheral stuff, but what I can speak to the standards is that I see an improvement, I see clarity, and I see rigor. And like I said, we've been working for several years towards it, and our district is all the way up the stream with this. So. Thank you.
Now, what I was hoping to do now is each of the panelists heard the other speak, and this is where each of them has about 2 minutes to respond to or comment on what they've heard. So let's, Jill, you have more time than anybody else. Why don't you start?
Sure. I feel like I'm running for president right now, so. But I'm not. First, I just have 4 points that I want to make, and the first is that I can appreciate the value of written standards. Standards, no one would argue that standards are a bad thing. Who has low standards, right? No one wants low standards for our children. But standards do not exist in a vacuum. Standards become meaningful for teachers and students when they are operationalized into assessments. And assessments drive what happens in classrooms. And assessments, standardized assessments, have proven impact on classrooms that are negative, and and they affect communities in poverty much more than they do other communities as well. They narrow the curriculum, they deprofessionalize the teachers. We're seeing many children in elementary schools who are only being taught literacy and math. There are no science classes, there are no social studies classes. And this is, I think, tragic. So they only exist when they're operationalized into standards. That's when they become meaningful. The documents themselves, perfectly fine. And the New York State standards did become dumbed down, I hate that term, but dumbed down because, to a great extent, No Child Left Behind required all students to have 100% proficiency level by 2014. So because these are all political documents and political things, as Mark is indicating, if I am the governor and I want to show that my students are at 100% proficiency, there is one easy way to do it, and that is to lower the benchmark for what is successful. This past spring, when the Common Core assessments were first piloted, John King did the opposite, to show that schools were failing and that the old standards were too low. And it did show that, if you believe the premise. And finally, I think it gets back to all of these questions come back to the idea of who decides. I believe in high standards for children, of course, but I also believe that teachers and parents and communities are best able to determine what standards are best for those children. And there is no one right way. Also, one final thing, the PTA has received a lot of money from the Gates Foundation to implement the Common Core. And this is not a bad thing. I don't blame the PTA for taking money. I like money. But that's part of the reason they can get out these wonderful guides and put together these wonderful programs. And why they're supporting the implementation of the Common Core, because it's funding. You follow the money.
Okay, Mark?
Apparently,
Julie, that was 2 minutes and 28 seconds, so you owe us 28 seconds. Mark?
I think there's a false debate regarding the role of opinion in people's views and the role of facts and analysis. In fact, one is supposed to inform the other. So for people to say that we need to have factual analysis and we don't care about what people's opinions are subtly saying that one shouldn't inform the other. Two, the idea driving the Common Core is the aim that we should be career and college ready. Career and college ready is not an aim, it's a level of development. You can't have an idea of a learning target, which is a level of development statement, absent an actual aim. And in fact, the Common Core is an aimless document. It doesn't actually tell us why we should be career and college ready. It doesn't help us answer that question. And I want to make it clear that the practitioner view is extremely important. And I value what you folks say, and I actually would love to visit both of your schools and see what's going on. I make a big deal out of trying to get into the schools because it helps me work with the folks I work with and provide a better kind of education for them, and it grounds me in the kinds of discussions that we're having here tonight. But make no mistake about it, when I was going to school, the teachers and administrators that were there knew what they were doing. They weren't clueless. If we erase our memory of how schools used to be and how they operated, we do a great disservice to everyone, including our own profession. That's different than saying there weren't problems. But to say that folks didn't know what they were doing until the Common Core were developed is a misrepresentation of the empirical reality that everyone we know lived through. That's it. Florence.
Well, I think my response would be that we have to be very careful in how, it is what it is. The Common Core is here for whatever it is. At the end of the day, people have to learn, students have to be able to read and write. I would like my students to be college and career ready. So it is what it is. Where I believe that my responsibility lies is to support teachers so that they can properly implement the Common Core, because that is the current requirement, whether it's against the law, whether it was, whatever. It is what it is, all right? If I don't support teachers in the implementation of that, I set them up for failure. And I also set up our students for failure. I respectfully disagree. There were a lot of low standards. Buffalo Public Schools has a lot of low standards. And if there is one thing that happens as the result of whatever it is, that we begin to foster a nation that, regardless of what zip code you come from, what color of your skin, where you had your last meal, that you are entitled to a quality education, then I'm all for it. Then I'm all for it, without a doubt. And I want to make sure that I support teachers so that they can help deliver the message that the children are entitled to learn. Because I want them to go into business. I'm like you. I like money. Go ahead.
Doug?
Just 2 quick points. I think, again, we start mixing standards and assessment, and I understand where some people are coming from. But when we throw that term standardized assessment out there and talk about how it's a bad thing, I want you to think about one standardized assessment is a 1-minute assessment. Standardized assessment means that it's given in the same way to any child who takes it, basically. We give a standardized assessment the minute students come into kindergarten. It takes 1 minute. And I ask them to name how many letters that they know. And this past year, our scores in our district ranged from 0. We had about 8 kids out of a cohort of 200 who came into kindergarten knowing no letters. And then we had about 15 students who could name over 70 letters in a minute. So you can see this large disparity. And assessments do feed and drive instruction, and they're not always a bad thing. I'm not talking about the big 3-day animal that we have to do in New York State, but some assessments, think about that teacher, how